thank you all for coming. Welcome. This is the first in the speaker series for the League of Women Voters in Hamilton, Wenham. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Because I don't want to get any closer. Perfect. So the speaker series in totality is being run by the Hamilton, Wenham League of Women Voters. We have a table in the back. Grab some flyers. There's some information on stuff that we do. It's a great group of people. You don't have to be a woman, just to make sure. But you want to definitely make sure that you sign in that you were here today. We'd like to know that. The series is also being supported by the library, which is a wonderful place that we have here in Hamilton, Wenham. And if at any time you need the bathrooms, number one, it's right past those doors on your right. The speaker series is also being sponsored thanks to some help from the local cultural council. So tonight's presentation, Civics 101 Get Engaged, is expected to be an in-depth look into how to get involved in any of our 3 levels of government, from local to state to federal. The PowerPoint that we'll use today is filled with information. Our speaker isn't going to go through it word for word because that would be boring to you. So we're going to use it as a guide, but the PowerPoint will be available, and if you're interested in having it to be able to get to the links that we're adding for you, you can just leave us your email and we can email you the PowerPoint afterwards. Our presenter tonight is Nick Ristino, who is a history teacher at the Hamilton Wenham Regional High School since 2007. In that time, he sat on the school council, advised student government, chaperoned numerous trips overseas.
Didn't lose a single kid.
Perfect. Thankfully. Spent 8 years as the JV boys lacrosse coach for my son Frankie at one point, and is currently the president of the Hamilton Wenham Regional Education Association. He lives in Portsmouth, New Hampshire with his wife, and his favorite hobbies are reading and keeping up to date on the latest policy proposals at all 3 levels of government. But before we get into that, I want to let you know that the speaker series that we are having is monthly, and we're starting tonight, of course, with Civics 101. On October 19th, it's going to be about local print journalism as a cornerstone of democracy. November 16th, sustainability. January 18th, affordable housing. February 15th, media literacy. And March 28th, my daughter's birthday, by the way, water resources and conservation. So it's a great thing. You should grab a flyer if you can on your way out. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce Jane Kuzel, whose name I say wrong every time. She is a lawyer. She's an amazing lady, and she is a member of the League of Women Voters in Hamilton Wenham Steering Committee. She's going to come up and tell you a little bit about the league. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Hi, my name is Jane Kuzel, and we really appreciate you showing up tonight for this. It's the beginning of our speaker series, and we really hope to do this every year. And so if there are topics that you're interested in, please let the league know, because we'd love to bring speakers that speak to local issues that our community wants to know about. But as for the League of Women Voters has both the national, state, and local level. It's a grassroots organization. It was started in 1920, 6 months before women were given the right to vote. And their primary purpose is to empower voters. So their motto is empowering voters, defending democracy. And how they do that is they provide a variety of information and advocacy for all people. And so their focus is on voter services, from information, helping people vote, advocating for greater expansion of voting rights. And then they also are very focused on citizen education. So they provide a wide variety of information, materials to people, as well as they do promote and do advocacy for particular policies that they have studied and they want to promote that help the citizens in a broad level. So it's organized at the national level, and then we have a League of Women Voters at the state level, and then we have the League of Women Voters here in Hamilton, Wenham. And our focus is to provide information more focused down to our local level, things that would be interesting to our community. We have a newsletter that provides all sorts of information, as well as information that the state or national league may have for people. We have a Facebook page, so please follow us on Facebook. We promote civic education, and one of the fun ways that we do that is through the Civics Bee, which Nick graciously helped moderate last spring for us. And the Civics Bee is a wonderful community event. It's focused on kids, but they're not the only ones there participating. We have adults, we have mixed groups of kids and their parents or other adults, and it's quite very competitive on the information side. We started last year in January a volunteer fair, which was hugely successful. What that did is bring a lot of the nonprofit organizations around Hamilton and Wenham, as well as the surrounding areas, to provide information for people to know what organizations are out there, what do they do, and how can you get engaged with those volunteer organizations. So that was a great benefit to the community that we organized. We have a guide for running for office for Hamilton Wenham, and we also put together voting information, and we also do a candidates night, which has been very successful as well. So anyone who's running for office in our local elections, when there's more than one person for the same office, we'll hold a candidates night where they're able to answer questions that are posed to them. It's been open to the community, and during the pandemic we did it by Zoom. We're exploring the better, how best to communicate this information and make it available to everyone, especially right before you vote, so that you can remind yourself, what did that candidate say, what am I interested in? So information we always keep on our league website as well. So if you want any information about what the local league is doing, feel free to leave your email address and sign up. We love to add you to our mailing list for email newsletter, as well as other information that we provide from time to time. So now I'm going to let Nick take over and give the rest of the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jane, thank you, Diane, and thank you to the League. It's an honor and a pleasure to be able to talk to folks about something that really is near and dear to my heart, which is our system of governance, our democracy, and how we all can get involved, and all should get involved in different ways, whether it's federal, state, or local. One through line through our presentation tonight is that democracy is not a spectator sport. And whether it's at your local board of selectmen, or select people, or at the State House, or with your members of Congress, advocacy and action is so critical to ensuring that we preserve our democracy and then pass it on to future generations as we have inherited it from those that came before. So first of all, the question comes, well, when we talk about civic engagement, what is civic engagement? And there's multiple types of ways to get involved. First of all, it's really important to learn how government works, because so many of the questions that you may have or positions you may want to take in terms of advocacy require you to learn the ins and outs of how a certain government agency works, or even where to go. Is this an issue for my local government? Is this an issue for my state government? And let's say it's an example for the local government. Is this something I want to take to the board of select people? Is this something that I want to take with the zoning board of adjustment, etc.? Being informed is really important in terms of being aware of what's out there. So we all experience this in our lives. There's so many times where something happens, a law gets changed, there's a new policy that gets enacted, and there's a shock factor when it impacts our day-to-day lives. Being informed is one of those ways of knowing when things are coming down the pike, or if something's being deliberated or debated, knowing that that's coming and being able to advocate for one side or the other. And then getting engaged, taking action is so critical for us at a local, state, and federal level. So, that begs the question, okay, what are we talking about when we talk about multiple levels of government? I keep mentioning federal, state, and local government. Well, who you contact or what steps you take as an advocate for a particular position depends on which of these levels of government is responsible for the policy or condition that you want ameliorated or addressed. So, and sometimes, not to complicate things too much, there's intersections where, federal grant money gets sent to a state, and that grant money, it has stipulations attached to it. So, for instance, like Medicaid expansion, which Massachusetts did, based on really affordable care, which is based on Massachusetts' own state-based law. Well, Medicaid expansion has certain rules attached to it that the federal government stipulates. So even though Medicaid's run by the state of Massachusetts, the federal government is responsible for laying out sort of the rules for if you expand Medicaid, you have to, and accept federal funds for that, you have to meet certain criteria. Highway funding is another good example of that. So sometimes things intersect at more than one level, but knowing, is it an issue that is best addressed through writing to my member of Congress? Is this an issue that's best addressed by calling up my state rep? Or is this an issue best addressed by showing up at town meeting or the select board meeting? Is really essential for thinking about next steps. So, something that's getting a lot of news coverage recently is the federal government. We've all heard about, okay, there's executive, legislative, judicial branches, and understanding what they do and understanding how things are working or not working in Washington can help us if the issue is federal based. So a good example here is, there could be a federal shutdown coming, where if the federal government doesn't have money to operate, Congress has the power of the purse, then members of our military will continue to serve on active duty, but they will not get paid. National parks will shut down. People who are new to Social Security rules will not be able to enroll because that office will be closed. In that case, that's the House and the Senate that have to pass that legislation. You'd be writing to your members of Congress. I've done that before. It's very easy to do. You go online to your member of Congress's page, and they'll have a little button you can click and write to your member of Congress. You can call them up. There's a number of different ways to advocate with your member of Congress. If you're upset about something that the president is doing, you can contact the White House. There's a famous scene in All the President's Men, which is one of my favorites, where Robert Redford, who's portraying Bob Woodward, calls the White House. And it's a great scene because there had been in the personal ledger of one of the Watergate burglars the name HH at WH. It was Howard Hunt at the White House. So Bob Woodward calls the White House and asks, why is the name of somebody who works at the White House in the notebook of a Watergate burglar? And because the person gave him an evasive answer, that spurred further investigation from Bob Woodward that eventually uncovered the ins and outs of the Watergate scandal. So you can contact the White House, you can write to the president. If there is somebody that will check that, so don't write anything untoward, the Secret Service will be coming to your house. You can contact your member of Congress, whether it be the House or the Senate. But even if you're concerned about the judicial branch, because that's not an elected branch, that's appointed, in the news, Supreme Court ethics has been a hot button issue. Federal judges have to follow a pretty stringent series of ethics rules, but they don't really apply to the Supreme Court. And so Congress is bandying about the idea of passing legislation that would force the Supreme Court to follow an ethics code. And then the Supreme Court has that they will issue their own ethics code that they'll voluntarily abide by. So even though we don't vote for members of the Supreme Court, the president appoints somebody, the Senate either approves of them or disapproves of them, you can still advocate for something that impacts the Supreme Court because the judicial branch will impact that. Now that raises the question, well, who do I contact? If I'm upset about the pending federal government shutdown, or I want there to be, for instance, term limits for Supreme Court justices. Currently, Supreme Court justices serve for life. Who do you contact? Well, in terms of your Massachusetts legislators, no surprise, they're all Democrats. I looked it up the other day, and the only Republican currently serving in Congress, if you discount independents who caucus with the Democrats is Susan Collins, senator from Maine. Otherwise, all the House members from across New England are either Democrats or independents who caucus with the Democrats, and the same goes for the Senate, because Angus Ting, who's one of Maine's other senators, is an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. So you've got Ed Markey, who's your member of the House of Representatives, and then you've got, you got Seth Moulton, who's your member of the House of Representatives. Edit that, Bill. And then you've got Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren, who are your senators. So, you can do this. You can go home tonight if you're passionate about something that impacts Congress, and that's nationwide legislation. The shutdown's a perfect example. And you can write to them, and you can advocate with them. I received a response when I live in New Hampshire, I wrote to my members of Congress during COVID lockdown regarding school funding, something near and dear obviously to my heart, and I received a response. To me, even though I knew that they were receiving tons of correspondences, they had lots of things on their plate, I felt like I was an active participant in our democracy, and I really encourage you to do that. Now let's say that the federal government shutdown happens. Beacon Hill will not be shut down, and so Massachusetts also has a wide array of power in terms of state government. We can all recall our civics classes as kids. Powers that aren't explicitly provided to the federal government get delegated to the states. So education policy is a good example of that, although there are times where federal dollars are tied to a state adopting certain policy positions. Education is something that's largely handled by the states. When it comes to the state government of Massachusetts, Massachusetts has a wide array of things that they handle on a day-to-day basis on Beacon Hill and Boston. And let's say DC gets shut down, Beacon Hill will be open for business. Now, in terms of, say, like Chapter 70 funding would be a good example. So, in New England, we've got a lot of local control over our school districts, but there is state funding in Massachusetts we refer to as Chapter 70 funding that goes to different local districts. And let's say you're concerned about your property tax rates, where Hamilton and Wenham don't have a lot of commercial real estate, so the funding for municipal services, including the high school where I work, is on the backs of residential property tax payers. And if the state would kick in more Chapter 70 money to Hamilton and Wenham, then that would help defray the cost of running the district, and property taxes wouldn't have to go up as much. This is a hypothetical example. You can contact your state representatives and advocate for an enhanced Chapter 70 funding for Hamilton and Wenham. Now, in terms of, you might notice that you only have one state senator and a bunch of different state representatives, whereas in the federal Congress, you have one rep, because it's just one rep per district, and you have two senators. Different states do it differently. In my state of New Hampshire, your random fun fact is that it is one of the largest legislative bodies in the English-speaking world. Tiny little New Hampshire has a huge House of Representatives. And we have multi-representative districts, so we'll have districts that cut across different towns, and the idea is that it can really help advance local coverage of political issues that you're going to have multiple people representing. Same thing in Massachusetts. You've got 3 state representatives, but 1 state senator. And I'll point out, Bruce Tarr is a Republican. There are Republicans in elected office in Massachusetts. As we all know, Massachusetts has a habit of electing moderate Republican, sort of old-timey New England Republican governors. And old-timey because that sort of brand of New England Republican is almost like an endangered species, not to give you a history lesson, but you think of going back to Bill Weld, just had the governorship of Charlie Baker. So Bruce Tarr, Republican, is in the minority, but he's an important minority leader in terms of your state house representatives. So, Massachusetts has a very well-functioning state house. They're not going to get shut down if the federal government gets shut down. If you're concerned about Chapter 70 funding, if you're concerned about projects that the state is doing regarding like commuter rail expansion or regulations regarding the MBTA. That's something that you would advocate for with your state representatives. But when it comes to a lot of the day-to-day stuff, I'm reminded of a Massachusetts politician, Tip O'Neill, who was a Democratic Speaker of the House. He also had a brief appearance on Cheers. He quipped that all politics is local. And, right now we're living through a time where, honestly, lots of politics are nationalized. You hear the same talking points at, say a school committee meeting or a select board meeting here in Hamilton or Wenham that you might hear in St. Louis, Missouri, that you'll hear in Los Angeles, California. People will say the same things in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Trust me, I hear it. But that being said, this axiom still holds true. If you're concerned about a pothole, you're not going to contact your member of Congress. A pothole in your neighborhood is something that is handled by the government in Hamilton and Wenham. If you're concerned about sidewalks, you want sidewalks to be replaced, you want sidewalks to be removed in a particular neighborhood, that's going to be handled by the local government. School funding, although I gave the example of Chapter 70 funding, the ins and outs of the school district budget is handled by the local school board. So there's so much that is handled at the local level, especially here in New England, where in some other areas of the country, like school policy is handled at more of a county level, but really in Massachusetts and across New England, it goes back to the colonial period in terms of really intense local governance. So you have your select board, and the select board does a lot of the work of setting the policy priorities for the town, hiring a town manager, they're giving the town manager their, not their marching orders, that's not the right way of saying it, but setting the framework under which that town manager is going to operate, and they're the ones that help set the agenda for town meeting, which is run by the town moderator, correct? Yes, town moderator. Okay, see, I live in a city which has a municipal government, and so it's different. Town meeting is, and I don't know if everybody here appreciates how unique that is. That goes back to the colonial era. That is people in a room, and yes, it can get rowdy, yes, it can get noisy, but it is direct democracy at heart. Like, you vote on the town budget. Where I live, people go to the city council meeting, they give their 2 cents on the budget, they write to the members of the city council, or bother them at the grocery store, I know, because I've done it. But then when my city council where I live passes the budget, that's it. This is the municipal budget, the town manager where I live will implement it, and the city departments enact the different policies that are in place. But a town meeting, you and your neighbors come together to vote on the budget for the towns. And that's very empowering. That's also not something that's done in large swaths of the world. You'd have to go to Switzerland, where they do a lot of direct voting, to have something that unique. And that really makes it at a local level. Now, you might burn some bridges if you get a little too heated at town meeting. I would certainly advocate for decorum, but it's democracy in action in a way that in many instances folks don't have, because that's not the structure of their government. That's not the cast aspersions on the things in my town. I like my current city council, but town meeting is a very special and unique thing that it's like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting when you see everybody gathered at town meeting. Now, in terms of engagement, I keep mentioning getting engaged and being involved. There's so many different ways to do that. I mentioned the story of Chapter 70 funding, talking at a school committee meeting, or writing to your legislator. But that's not just the only way to get involved. The easiest way, or the way that, it's not easy, the way that comes to mind for most people is, I'm going to run for office. It's like that great line in Network, I'll clean it up. I'm mad as heck, and I'm not going to take it anymore, and so I'm going to run for office. That is something that I certainly encourage you all to do, either run for your local select board, run for your zoning board of adjustment. Getting named to a town board might seem like it's not the most enthralling thing, but then when, a zoning change happens and it impacts your neighborhood or impacts your town, that people suddenly get very concerned about zoning. Trust me, where I live, zoning is a big deal. So you can run for office, and you should, but not everybody is going to run for Congress, not everybody's going to run for the State House, and not everybody's necessarily going to run for the Board of Selectmen, or select people, sorry. It is very hard work. It's a lot of late nights, and not all of it's fun. People can get very upset with you over an issue, and then you have a disagreement about that at a meeting, and then you have to talk about like signage at a business because they want to, put an umlaut over an A, and that you have to make sure that that passes the code. But you know what? That's democracy at work. But also, you can be an advocate. So maybe you don't have the bandwidth or the time to be at every single one of those meetings. They often go late. But you want to make your voice heard on a particular issue. Affordable housing, which the league is going to be talking about. It's a significant issue, not just here, it's an issue where I live, it's an issue nationwide. And it's a complicated issue. I can't tell you how many times I have heard somebody say, well, I'm not opposed to affordable housing, I'm just opposed to this project for affordable housing. And that kind of complicated issue requires buy-in from people, and that also requires advocates to let elected officials know, like, yes, this is something that we support, or no, this isn't. So how does one advocate? Certainly you can post on social media your opinion, and we've all done it, and it feels very cathartic to do so, but it's often referred to as slacktivism, like you post on social media and then that's it. And while it can be very helpful to post on social media and get your opinion out there and get your voice out there and rally support, taking the next step is really powerful. Whether that's speaking at the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board meeting, or testifying in front of the State House if it's an issue that is something that you need to go to Beacon Hill for. Passing out pamphlets, passing out flyers. Pressure, the phrase is pressing the it's been a long day. Pressing the flesh. Now, post-pandemic, maybe you're not going to shake a bunch of hands and pat a bunch of people on the back. Maybe you're just going to wave. But having those one-to-one conversations with people. I am concerned about, I've seen the signs in Ipswich for Stop Bruni Project. And I've had to ask my colleagues who live in Ipswich what the heck that means. Well, those people put a sign in their lawn to stop the Bruni Project. People that may support the Bruni Project need to advocate and get people on board to support it. So advocacy, where you're, out in front of Crosby passing out pamphlets or talking to people one-to-one, showing up at a meeting is an important and powerful way to make your voice be heard. First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States says that people have the right to petition their government for redress of grievances, which is a fancy way of saying you can tell the government what you want to happen. And you can do that at the local level, you can do that at the state level, you can do that at the federal level. And you see that often at the federal level where people will protest. And so they'll go to their member of Congress's office and they'll shut it down. And that is something that people have done throughout the course of history to get attention for their cause. But you don't have to drive all the way to DC to protest something. Let's say there's a policy that you're very much opposed to, or there's a policy that you're very passionate about. Let's take voting rights, for instance. If you're concerned about a voting rights issue at the national level, you can go to Washington, D.C., you can protest at the Capitol, peacefully. You can go to your member of Congress's offices. This happens all the time, and picket outside, because guess what? The staffers that are inside will say, hey, by the way, we had a bunch of people holding signs and protesting about X, Y, or Z issue. You can get a group of people together and go to Patton Park and have signs and have banners and get attention that way. That is another way of advocating for a particular issue. Now let's say that's not your cup of tea. Maybe you're more of a coffee drinker like me. You can join organizations that will advocate for a particular issue. You hear about them all the time in your everyday life. So, League of Women Voters, concerned about ensuring that democracy gets passed down from one generation to the next and that we have a healthy democracy. Our fellow citizens join the League of Women Voters because they're concerned about democracy, and so they take action that way. You've probably seen in the news examples of like climate protesters who throw paint at a painting. That's one strategy to use. I'm not going to say one way or the other if that's a good strategy. That's just one strategy people use. But there's also organizations dedicated to advocating for legislation and changes in our economy that would blunt the effect of human beings on the climate. And you can join those organizations. And when they go and they meet with their member of Congress, because as an organization, they have the right to freedom of speech. They have a right to petition government for redress of grievances. You can be a part of that action. There's also other ways that you can get involved that's just very local. So it's a corny anecdote, but I'll give it to you. In my neighborhood, the city wanted to change the sidewalks. The sidewalks had gotten really beat up. And what that would require is dozens of trees getting cut down. And my neighborhood's near a highway. And my wife, my saintly wife, was very concerned about the impact of air quality, because we're by a highway. She didn't want all these trees to get cut down. And no one ever used the sidewalks in her neighborhood anyway. So, she attended meetings where the employees of the city met with people in the neighborhood to talk about the sidewalks project. And she, frankly, was the lone person in the room who said, please don't cut down the trees. I don't care about the sidewalks. Everybody else said this was the best thing since sliced bread. Then people came around in the neighborhood because the project was kind of slow going. And, they weren't part of an official organization. They weren't, part of a fancy group, and they weren't holding a protest, but they were getting people to sign a petition that they were going to send to the city council because they wanted to expedite the sidewalk project. And when that person came to the front door, my wife said respectfully, I'm not going to sign your petition because I don't want all the trees to get cut down. I'm more concerned about air quality. Now, ultimately, she lost, and the city put in the sidewalks, and I will admit those sidewalks are very nice. They're very straight and smooth, and I'm not allowed to use them out of protest. But our across the street neighbors were huge advocates for it. And, one of the last things I'll leave you with in terms of engagement before we'll open it up to questions is, these are people that I've known since my parents thought about having a third kid. Like, they knew me before I knew me. And these are people I really cherish. They were big advocates for the sidewalks. And my wife was against the sidewalks, and subsequently I was against the sidewalks. I am allowed to think for myself, but I was more or less ambivalent. But I too was concerned about the trees. They cut down the trees, they put in the sidewalks, and they knew that we didn't like the sidewalks. They like it, and then we moved on. And when we're living in a time of such intense polarization, I say that to you because as you advocate, you might lose. You might win. And it's almost like a good sports analogy. You're supposed to shake hands in the lineup. Remember that when you're a kid, you were lining up with the other team, or you've seen it with your own kids, and you're hoping please don't hit the kid that hit you late. We talked about it and then we moved on. And my wife lost that round, but having done that, now she feels more comfortable speaking at city council meetings. She feels more comfortable sharing her opinion on Facebook or Nextdoor, which I try to avoid. And even though she's certainly not, joining an organization committed to preserving trees, she certainly has thought about it. You might lose, you might win, but you can lose with grace, you can win with grace. And even if, win or lose, you feel like the outcome isn't quite what you wanted it to be, it's so important to get involved. It's so important to write to your member of Congress. It's so important to contact your state representatives. It's so important to run for office, to join the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And I keep harping on it, but you know what? People care about zoning, and it's important. Because this is our democracy. This is our day-to-day lives get impacted by policies that get crafted, here in Hamilton, or actually here in Wenham, get crafted down in Boston, get crafted down in DC. And so, we are a government of, by, and for the people. It really requires all of us to get involved. And if you don't win this time, you try and do better the next time. You try to get more people to join your side, because that, if you disconnect, and I know that's not going to be any of you because you're here tonight, but if you disconnect, and that happens on a large enough scale, then we don't have a government that represents the interests of the people, because too few people's voices get heard. So, my last point is different strategies for getting involved, because I was just talking about it with somebody as I was walking through the door. We can all recall when we were growing up, the local newspaper. My students were baffled to hear me say that, when I was growing up, we had 2 morning papers, the Boston Globe and one of our local papers delivered to our house. And then we had a whole other local newspaper delivered in the afternoon. I asked my students, how many of you have a newspaper delivered to your home? I have over 100 students right now across my 5 classes, and about 3 kids raised their hands. And, some people may have digital subscriptions, but, how do you find out about the select board meeting? How do you find out about the school committee meeting? How do you find out what's happening down at Beacon Hill? Now, there's going to be great resources in this PowerPoint that can help you find out what's going on. But, it really is not just a spectator sport. Democracy is not a spectator sport, just in the sense that getting involved is important. Being informed takes a lot of effort. So, yes, you can check out what's happening on social media, because members of the select board, members of the school committee, they will use social media to let people know about policies and things that are being discussed. You can watch, there's a Republican presidential debate last night. You can hear straight from the candidates their positions on different issues. You can watch interviews on, say, like 60 Minutes, or if WCVB is interviewing somebody who's in the State House. You can subscribe to the Salem Evening News. You can advocate for, you can even write to the editor of the Salem Evening News and demand more local coverage. My wife and I, we subscribe to our local newspaper. And we do that because we want to make sure that we're supporting that local journalism to find out what's happening in our local area. You can go online and read what the agenda is for your local municipal offices. The select board will post their agendas, the school committee posts their agendas. I check it all the time. That is one way to find out what's being discussed at the next meeting. But there are also other ways that you can get maintain your information levels to know what's being discussed. So besides news media, where you do have to practice news media literacy, which is an important skill to have, why is somebody making this claim in a news article or in a news report? Is this being corroborated by somebody else? For organizations, they will have websites where you can understand what positions they're taking. The League of Women Voters has a website. You can see what positions they're taking on a particular issue. If you want to know what Moms Demand Action or the National Rifle Association believe regarding gun policy in the United States, they have websites that you can go and read up on information regarding what policies they're advocating for, because they'll have influence with members of Congress. Those other kind of third-party organizations, like a think tank, like the Heritage Foundation, which is a prominent conservative think tank, or the Brookings Institution, which is more center-left, they'll put out research reports that you can download and read, and nerds like me do download and read those kind of things, because I know that is influential in terms of public policy, and I want to know what's going on. So those are things that I do. And you can also check out nonpartisan third-party organizations. So there's a link here, or I think it mentions 411.org. If you want just like nuts and bolts information about how the elections work, there's a whole website dedicated to that. The League of Women Voters will have information about what to do on election day. Because different states will have different rules. Heck, every year, every election, I go to my town clerk's website to read through, any new changes in New Hampshire state law regarding voting. So I know I gave you a lot of different bits of information regarding how to stay informed, how different levels of government operate. We wanted to throw the floor open to any questions that people had. But before I do this, I wanted to thank you for sitting there so graciously and listening to me. I certainly hope that, after tonight, I've given you a lot to chew on, and in any way, shape, or form, and no matter what policy you want to advocate for, you leave this room inspired to go and to advocate and win or lose, that you feel like you've partaken in this democracy that's so precious, and that, at least I feel, we all have an obligation to pass on to the next generation.
Great, thank you. Before we open up for questions, I just want to thank Nick for coming and doing this for us. So
Thank you very much.
And also I wanted to thank Diane for helping organize this event. And we also want to thank the Hamilton Wyndham Library that joined us in putting the speaker series together and giving us the space, and the Hamilton Wyndham Cultural Council provided some funding for this. So we really appreciate all that. So, and before we go to questions, I also wanted to point out in the back of the slide deck that you can get, if you give us your email address, we'll send it to you, or it will also be on our website. But we have different ways that you can get resources and contact people. So just wanted to let you know that. So are there any questions for Nick or the league?
So I have a question. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very inspiring. And I have a question. You talked about advocacy for whatever your cause, your interest might be. As you may have noticed, there's a lot of polarization. And do you have any strategies to maybe letting all voices be heard?
So that's like the not just $1 million question, it's like the $1 billion question. There are organizations that, so PBS NewsHour has been covering this very issue. How do we foster environments for people to come together and debate and discuss and maybe disagree civilly, but more importantly, understand where one another is coming from. And so there are organizations that actually do that. They will bring people together to have these conversations. My best piece of advice is to simply ask people why. And it's a very hard thing to do. I know, because somebody might say something that's grossly offensive to you, really violates your core values. And if you can just, and again, we've all had those moments where we've lost our temper, but if you can foster a space for that dialogue where you can say, well, why? Why do you think that? Upon what do you base that opinion? That, I think, can help really foster that dialogue. In terms of how do we create space in our public spaces, I think we need to be mindful of sort of the bumpers. You remember playing with bumper bowling? So there's certain rules and regulations we need to follow to make sure that we're within the boundaries. My town just had to pass a rule that you can't play music at public comment. And it's because somebody played a song that was offensive during public comment, and the guy didn't even live in my town. And so the city council didn't want to squelch any sort of conversation. They wanted to encourage it, but they said, look, you can't be offending people, and you gotta we're here to hear from the citizens. And I thought about that quite a lot, because even though in that instance it's them saying you can't do that, ultimately I think that will help foster moral conversation, because people will say, look, this is going to be serious. We're going to hear from the citizens at the city council about something that we care about, and I'm not going to be heckled by somebody that thinks differently than me. To that end, making sure that when we have these kind of public spaces for dialogue and private spaces for dialogue, that we manage how we react when somebody else speaks. And I'm frankly the worst offender of this in my personal life. I'm very good at it as a teacher, so I have to set a good example for the kids. But in my personal life, I'm the type that's and I've seen it happen where then somebody that wants to go speak, they get nervous. They can't think about what they want to say. It's not me heckling them, it's my reaction. And so if we can create spaces where we're trying to think through what somebody's saying, we're encouraging them to speak, I think we can have that kind of dialogue, and that also that we be respectful of people in those spaces, so that I'm not going to do something that's going to squelch their speech, but also I'm also not going to do something that's going to create a circus-like atmosphere at public comment. So and there are, like I said at the beginning, whole organizations that are dedicated to try to bridge those divides, because we are in a very, very polarized time. And you look at any number of data points to get to that. People have lost contact with family, they've lost contact with friends. Even in terms of media consumption habits, it's vastly different based on partisan alignment. You go to the Pew Research Center, actually has great data on that. And that's all very revealing to see, because then you can see why it is that so often people talk past each other as opposed to talk with each other.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
What was the last time that you were about?
Somebody made I went to my local city council meeting. I feel like it's like a confessional. I went to my local city council meeting to speak in favor of an affordable housing project in my neighborhood, because so many of my neighbors, we had this meeting and it became a circus and people were screaming, and I actually yelled at the mayor because he wouldn't call on people who were being well behaved, and he kept talking to the people that, kids, if you're watching this, which I know you're not because you're on TikTok, or doing your homework, don't do this. But he was paying attention to the people that were screaming at him instead of the people that were calmly raising their hands. And I yelled, I said, could you please stop talking to those people and call on the people that have been patient? And the very next person said something I disagreed with in terms of the housing project, but I said, you know what, you've been quietly raising your hand and you want to be acknowledged, you have the right to speak. So a few months later, there's a city council meeting. And I wanted to, after this circus event that happened in my neighborhood, I said, I want to go and speak in favor of this affordable housing project in my neighborhood so that the city council can hear that it's not that everybody doesn't want this project. Some people don't want it. Some people are okay with it, but they don't like the way it's currently set up. Some people, it's not even what the project is, it's how the city went about it. And so I went up, I made my speech. I thought I did pretty well. And I sat back down, and somebody got up, and actually the guy that just got banned, and he started saying something that I found really, really offensive. And I actually won't even dare repeat what it was because it's so bad. And I started making comments. And my wife kind of just elbowed me and said, knock it off. He's not gonna stop because Nick Rustino disapproves. He's not well, Nicholas Rustino's making comments while I'm speaking. And she always reminds me, because she's a saintly, lovely woman, that, when we react like that, we're giving somebody what they want. They want that reaction. It's no different than my students in class who want to egg somebody on because they want to get that reaction out of them. It's the same for us. And so the last time I kind of harumphed when somebody was speaking, they said something grossly offensive, and I gave them what they wanted. They wanted that reaction from me, and I fell for it. And afterwards, I was driving home, and it was nuts. I did that. So I don't want to say, do as I say, not as I do, but in that instance, as I say, not as I do, I didn't do the right thing in that moment.
I apologize if I missed this because I was late, but I know you were just mentioning that there are some organizations who focus on trying to bring different sides together. Do you have off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I'd have to go back. So PBS NewsHour, their anchor for many years is Judy Woodruff, and she's semi-retired, and what she's doing right now is a journalistic project where she goes around the country and interviews people to try to get at the root of why is polarization so bad right now. And there's an organization that I think it was out in Ohio, brought people together to foster dialogue. So the name escapes me. I know it's out there.
Storyful.
What?
Storyful.
Okay, Storyful.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and that is the kind of stuff that when the framers thought of our democracy, and although they left certain people out of it, you know, they were envisioning people having those kind of dialogue and that kind of disagreement. And by the way, like, they disagreed with each other fervently. You should read the things they wrote about each other. You think things that people post on social media is bad. They used fancy words to say, like, that person's an idiot and that person has bad manners. So it is part of, democracy can be very messy. Yeah, storyful. Thank you for that. That they're doing very good work.
There's also an organization called No Labels, which tries to focus on the policy, not the people or the party. But I just wanted to reiterate what you're saying about focus on the policy, not the people. And another thing that I think is valuable is being an advocate for what you're in favor of, not just an opponent of what the other person is in favor of. Advocate for what you think is the right path and ask them questions about why they think, who benefits from that policy? Why do you like that? Like, not that you're wrong, because that shuts people down, and all they're thinking about is the next thing they can throw at you that argues against what you're saying. So advocacy, not opposition.
Yeah, perfectly said. I couldn't have said it better myself, because, you know, ultimately, you could just oppose and be mad at people, but really, you're trying to convince people to support, like, your cause or your candidate, and you get more flies with honey than with vinegar. You know, you're trying to sway people to your side. And persuasion, by the way, is very hard. If you ever look at, like, the science around it, cognitively, we are hardwired to double and triple and quadruple down on what we already thought before. It's part of, like, the human mind. And we all have to train ourselves to be discerning and be contemplative. And even if we end a conversation still believing what we want to believe in terms of public policy, be it school curriculum or health insurance coverage or, you know, private ownership of firearms, to leave a conversation more well-informed about why somebody might disagree with us, or having more nuanced understanding, I think is very fruitful.
I think that's the word. Understanding another's perspective really helps to break down those sort of head-to-head barriers. And I think when I listen to people, I certainly have my own opinions about things, but I think it's important to understand another person's perspective. I think the problem comes when they don't understand their perspective, and then you're more apt to get sort of an angry response. And I like the idea of working with groups that perhaps try to break down those sort of polarized opinions.
Yeah, and really the things that they do is stuff that, like, as a teacher I have to do in a classroom, where I say to students, like, let them finish, you know, ask a probing question, you know, focus on the idea, not on trying to win, like we're not keeping score. And, you know, that, it's very difficult to do, but that's democracy.
We are addressing civics education tonight, but what are your thoughts about the state of civic education generally in the country? I mean, here in Massachusetts has been some work most recently. If you could just share your thoughts, because I think that contributes to a lot of misunderstandings that people have about who has what powers and how to affect change. And
Yeah, I am concerned, and it's on two levels. Like, I get concerned about laws that get passed in states that cause teachers to feel like I can't teach about X, Y, or Z thing because I might lose my teaching license, which, I'll be frank, I don't have to worry about that in Massachusetts. Because that stifles that kind of free debate and exploration of ideas that's so critical for kids. Underfunding of civics education is a major issue that I feel needs more attention, which is connected to, there are issues with staffing in Massachusetts in terms of being able to staff public schools. It is a full-on crisis in some areas of the country to get qualified teachers in the classroom. And so even though it might not be something that is a law-squelching classroom discussion or debate on particular topics, but it's a law or a licensing requirement or the pay of teachers in particular corners of the country that prevents people who would be good at teaching, being in the classroom, building the kind of trust with kids and the community that is necessary for education to really thrive. Not to toot my own horn, but one of the reasons why, like, I, on a day-to-day basis, can have kids talk about controversial issues is that, like, I've been working here this is my 17th year here. I know the kids, I know the community, the parents and guardians know who I am, and they also know that, like, if there's a question or they don't like something I have in my classroom, they can talk to me about it. And I've got a master's degree in curriculum and teaching, I know what I'm doing, and by the end of that conversation, 9 times out of 10, they're like, oh, okay, I get it, I'll reiterate that with my kid. But it's not simply a matter of like curriculum and policy and how much we're paying teachers in, say, like Kentucky or Missouri. It's also those kind of habits that we've been talking about all night. I regularly text with my best friend, who we went to college together, and we're both history majors, very passionate about history, passionate about civic engagement. And we don't agree necessarily on politics. We know each other's politics very well. We're very curious. We ask each other all the time to explain, to discuss. We have these like long text threads discussing and debating, and we schedule phone calls to talk to one another about stuff. And he's a veteran. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan. He actually had to move his wedding up because he was getting sent to Afghanistan. He spent the first year married. His wife working on her PhD, him off in Afghanistan. And the thing that we always come back to, and especially around like Veterans Day, Memorial Day, or the ones where we're always going back and forth, is how important it is for people to be engaged, and that connects to civics education. Because I feel like for so many people, they take their, say, like 8th grade civics class, they take their field trip to DC, and then that's it. We've all seen like the footage of somebody that like walks around with a microphone, like, who's the Speaker of the House? And it's Kevin McCarthy. And he's from, I think, Bakersfield, California. I mean, I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I can tell you who the Speaker of the House is. He's a Republican from California. Because I think that's my responsibility, to know these kind of things. And obviously, like, I'm not omnipotent, and I'm not going to be right about everything, but I think it's so important for us to do that. I don't have a great answer for how do we bridge that gap. We've got Massachusetts Civic Action Project. So kids take a class in 8th grade, then in high school they have to do a Civics Action Project. Well, I don't know how to, besides making an impassioned plea to my students, to make them have their Civic Action Project be a lifelong project. Because outside of like adults forcing a kid to read about it, how do we build those kind of habits that were just ingrained in me as a young age by my parents, like being a citizen is your responsibility. So I'm very concerned at a policy level, at a classroom level regarding civics education nationwide. You need well-qualified people in the classroom building that kind of community support necessary to have a civics curriculum that kids need to understand the basics of government. But we also, as a society, need to build the kind of habits that my best friend and I talk about all the time, that, from his perspective as a veteran, not to speak for him, but like so much has been sacrificed to get us to this point, in wars both justified and unjustified, we're both history people, to get us to this point, like we have an obligation to be a well-informed citizen and to pass it on to the next generation. And I guess part of the hokey answer is we got to model it. We got to model it for that next generation. And I'll be honest, I had to do a better job modeling it. Confessing my worst public behavior back home. I think if like my niece saw that, she'd be embarrassed. My wife certainly was embarrassed. And the kids are watching, and we've got to model for them the kind of behavior that we want to see, so that they pass it on.
In your classroom, do you actually have debate between the kids, or do you?
Yes, so it's world history, so it's the kind of thing that, I have to be conscious of how often I delve into like a current topic, because, today is not the medieval era. But like when I was in high school, 9/11 happened, and my teachers took time periodically, it's like we invaded Afghanistan, we invaded Iraq, to like talk in class about what was going on. And that's the kind of experience that I know that it falls on me to talk to my students about what's going on. And so I have to be judicious about what I address and what I don't. But it does connect to the curriculum, like building source analysis skills is how you build media literacy skills. So I do with my students article reviews where I have them read about an issue going on somewhere around the world, because I try to build their worldly knowledge. And it just starts with like read something from the BBC. Then as the year goes on, it's now corroborate that with information from another source. And if there's a difference, try to analyze why. We do talk about hot button issues. I will be honest, sometimes the kids want to debate. Other times, like when Donald Trump was impeached for the first time, I was like, President of the United States is getting impeached. Kids, this, I was alive when Bill Clinton got impeached, and my teachers took time to talk about it with me. I went into my classroom and I wrote by hand in my abysmal handwriting and read all the arguments being made by the Republicans and blew all the arguments being made by the Democrats. I read them to my students because they wouldn't be able to read what I wrote. And I said, okay, kids, discuss, debate, we're gonna take it to a vote. And they didn't want to discuss or debate. And in each class, it would be like one kid would have an opinion on things. And given the dynamics of Massachusetts, to be honest with you, it was most kids were like, he should be found guilty. And there'd be that one kid that was like, well, I don't think he should be impeached. So, I'm the teacher, I'm in an authority figure, and so it's not the same kind of debate as when the kids are debating. So I had to put on my debate hat and try to get the kids to think critically and say, well, what about this point, or what about that point? And actually, it wound up being more of an exercise of, okay, kids, if I were in Missouri, how would this debate look? And what does that tell you about the current state of American politics? That yielded a more fruitful conversation with the kids than discussing the intricacies of the first impeachment. And so I do try to address current issues. I do try to get kids to debate, but that polarization does trickle. It's a trickle-down polarization. Instead of trickle-down economics, there's trickle-down polarization that can impact the classroom. And so I have found that difficult. Also, sometimes the kids get overboard, and then they get in trouble. And then when other kids get in trouble, that kind of percolates out, they got in trouble. And so other kids get quiet. And so you don't get in trouble for debating. You get in trouble if you scream at your classmate and you stand up like you're about to hit them. That's wrong. You'll get a detention for that. Passionately debating something, that's quite literally why the school exists. And so, great question. I do try to address that in my class. I have to be judicious about when I do that, because I can't do it every day, otherwise the kids wouldn't have an understanding of medieval Europe, which they probably much prefer. But that is why we're here.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.